Well, hello, Chris. This is nice to see you. I'm Andy Pollock. I'm from the president of the LGBT network in the South Coast, and you are.
My name's Chris Morck. Good to see you, Andy. Thank you very much for this. It's an honor to be with you virtually right now. Really appreciate it. Thanks. I'm the rector of Grace Episcopal Church in New Bedford.
Somewhat known as St. Will and Grace sometimes.
That's true. Yeah, St. Will and Grace.
So
we had a Will and Grace group for some time.
Oh, that's great. That's
yeah.
great. So how did Grace come to the open and affirming position that it's has now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been at Grace for 8 years, and the ship sailed long before I arrived. So I wasn't part of, say, the transformation or the transition into a congregation that's fully open and affirming. But I would say it probably points, I'm sure there were conversations before this, without a doubt. But Bishop Gene Robinson, who was Bishop of New Hampshire, was the first openly gay person to be elected bishop out of any of the main Christian denominations that have bishops. And that was in 2003. I might have already just said that. So that, not that we did not have gay bishops before that, we certainly did, but Gene Robinson was the first completely open, a bishop completely open about his sexuality. And he was partnered, married, I believe, when it was legal to do so. So that was in 2003, and it wasn't the start of the conversation, but it went into what I would call an acute phase. So that's where things started to, rightly so, get a little rough. There was quite a lot of conflict in different dioceses of the Episcopal Church and churches, congregations, parishes. So there were many congregations. I imagine there were congregations where this was readily accepted. There were congregations where it absolutely was out of hand, denied as being a possibility. But then I think most congregations probably fell into the situation that Grace was in, which is there were people on both sides of the issue and people in between. So it ended up becoming a real conversation, not without conflict, within the congregation for a number of years. And but through that, and we had a number of gay and lesbian couples in the congregation, single people. And so it wasn't something that was a completely new idea here, as I understand it. So through that time, we gratefully were led to what I would consider to be the place we are at now, which is this is no longer a conversation at Grace between different viewpoints. I mean, like any organization, different people fall along a spectrum. So people fall along what is called a theological spectrum about what they believe, but also a social spectrum and a political spectrum. But the congregation actually adopted an anti-discrimination policy to put this in writing as a foundational piece for the church's mission and ministry and its belief system. And we had a lot of really good work. People who were right in the trenches here at Grace Church that helped get us to where we are today, which is unabashedly open and affirming. And we have had we've had gay and lesbian clergy here at Grace Church, and people in high levels of leadership here. And I feel very fortunate, and I do reflect on this. I'm fortunate to have inherited a congregation that believes the way it does on this important issue.
That's great. That's great. So what would it be like to go to Grace at a Sunday morning, or even have Saturday afternoon services, pre-COVID and post-COVID?
Well, that's an important distinction, right? So maybe pre-COVID, we have 4 services a week. We have a midweek Wednesday service, small, a Saturday 5 p.m. in the chapel, a Sunday 8 a.m. in the chapel, and then the main service is at 10 a.m. on Sundays. It will be again. But each service is a bit different, so the 10 o'clock has a choir and hymns and all of that, where the 5 o'clock is just spoken. And it's a smaller service. We might get 30 to 40 people on a Saturday, but in general, the what we call the liturgy, the structure of the service is the same. The main difference is, the 10 o'clock has a little bit more pomp, and the singing, where the 5 o'clock is a little more low key, 5 o'clock on Saturday, and no singing. But we begin the service with certain prayers that we have. We have a prayer book, someone called a missal, that's called the Book of Common Prayer, which has come down through centuries and has changed and been molded and framed throughout the years. But some of it is very similar to what we were doing 500 years ago. But and some of it's not. I mean, there's a lot of contemporary updates and language. So we start with prayers, and then there are readings from the Judeo-Christian scriptures, and then there's a sermon or homily. So someone, usually me, will speak, reflecting on the scriptures and maybe what we're going through at this particular moment in time. Then we have more prayers and what we call the Eucharist. So then we take communion together. And then we end being sent with a blessing, and then being sent forth into the world. Because we believe that church isn't what we do in the building. What we do in the building in our worship service should nourish us so that we can go out and be church in the world. The idea that worshiping together is actually just the start. Or maybe it's not just the start, it's somewhere in there. But what we do as church is really as we live our lives out in our communities and with each other and in our homes, how we carry ourselves and our values.
And you have a wonderful saying before communion is offered.
Yeah. So yeah, whoever you are, and we truly mean that, whoever you are, wherever you are in your journey of faith, come to the Holy Supper of the Lamb, or come, you're welcome at Grace, is what we say. And wherever you are in your journey of faith is, to me, that's an important part of that as well. Whoever you are, undoubtedly, that you are welcome, but that we don't, our life together isn't based on us all believing the same thing. We come around the common table, we say prayers together, and we live in a sort of community that's based on forgiveness and reconciliation and compassion and grace. No pun intended. But it's not because we all believe the same thing. And so we do confess a creed, but even the way we understand that, there are going to be differences. And there's no kind of Christian theological purity test in order to be part of the community. That diversity as well is, I think, a strength. That God is big. And St. Paul said, that in God we live, move, and have our being. And that's going to be different for every one of us in some ways. Each person's faith journey is made in community with people, but it's their faith journey.
So you come from a somewhat evangelical background. How did
Oh
you?
yeah.
Yeah. So
Definitely.
how did you come to this understanding, kind of the openness and affirming position that you've had?
Oh, oh man, it's true that I grew up in a very stereotypical, what I would call United States conservative evangelicalism. So, now I was a teenager 30 years ago, but you can see white conservative evangelicalism now in our country, and it's changed, but it hasn't changed that much. It's socially conservative, and so it's very, I feel like a good, I mean, this is my impression now, a good 50% of the time, we're not, if not more, we weren't talking about who we should be. We were talking about who we shouldn't be, and railing against all these other different groups. And so it was very, it was very anti LGBTQ. Of course, the T in that wasn't even thought of at that point. And that's unfortunate, but it was very anti gay and lesbian, vehemently so in my upbringing. My parents, they were not more open and affirming, but they had a certain tolerance that kind of, I think, helped me. But what really changed, I held that ideology or that belief system up through, maybe it's no surprise, I started to go to college. So I left home, I left my church environments, and what happened, and this might sound odd, a couple different things. I started to read the scriptures for myself. So even my freshman year, I decided I wasn't going to leave Jesus. I wanted to find out what Jesus was about outside of the way I grew up. And so I took our Bible and started to read it front to back. And I just make notes about things that didn't seem to cohere or make sense with the way that I had been raised, the way I'd been taught growing up. And that started to open things up for me in a big way. One of the things, maybe oddly enough as well, that changed was I started to take note about how aggressively anti-gay and lesbian the Christian communities were from which I came. And I also went to an evangelical college. So I started to take note about what they were saying in their rhetoric. And the heavy-handedness started to strike me as completely odd. It actually, I don't know if I can say this, it outed them in a way. I mean, where it didn't make sense. I'm reading scripture, and then I'm hearing what I hear from them, and it caused what we call cognitive dissonance. And I started to pay attention to that. And then, I started to meet people and have friendships with people who were gay and lesbian. And that also started to break things up for me. And I reached a point, and it was an evolving. It wasn't like a conversion, like a sudden conversion where I thought one thing and then all of a sudden I thought something else. It was a real evolution through years until I, and as I was traveling this path until finally I said, oh my gosh, God doesn't discriminate at all. It doesn't, these few passages in scripture, they don't, that some Christian groups use to discriminate, they don't even make sense in light of our current context. And what we say they're referring to, they don't even seem to be referring to that. And over and over again, it's this God of love, as Christians confess, that we know God in Jesus. And Jesus was brazenly open to groups that were religiously and socially put on the margins. And so I came to a place where I think I would say the Holy Spirit opened my heart to realize that the way I grew up was not where that God was calling me to something different.
That's great. Great story. Well, I'm glad that you listened.
Me too.
Yeah. Great.
And that my experience, it wasn't as the experience of many people in the LGBTQ community. I don't share that experience. Just in the slightest way, the very slightest way, is that my family was not terribly accepting of my own conversion to God's completely open and affirming love. Of course, it's nothing compared to the experience of my LGBTQ brothers and sisters. But I reflect on it, gives me maybe just a little, the slightest taste to kind of empathize a little bit.
So with COVID, how are you guys worshiping? And
right.
what
Yeah.
is a good way to connect with you?
Yeah, we're live streaming our services on Sundays at 10 o'clock on our Facebook page. So I think it's Facebook, and it's /Grace Church NB, like New Bedford. And so that's on at 10 o'clock Sunday mornings, but then it's recorded. So what we've seen is that through the day and even through the week, it gets more views. And it's actually better attended than our live services were.
The dance routine is better, huh?
Yeah. So we do it on our chapel. We have about 5 people who are physically distanced from one another. Mm-hmm. So we can put it on. We have some music as part of that service. And so that's 10 o'clock on Sundays. We also, Wednesdays, have a prayer service through Zoom. And all this information is on our Facebook page. And so that alternates. We have a noonday prayer service for maybe 15 minutes. And then the next week we have a 6 p.m. prayer service, which is again about 15, 20 minutes. And so every week we alternate.
Excellent.
So those are the 2 main things we're doing right now.
Great. Now, Grace is known in the community for a lot of the social justice pieces that you do. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the things that you do for outreach?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I distinguish the social justice from some of the outreach, though there's overlap. So, for instance, we have a food pantry, and that's the social justice piece would be if we're working to correct the injustices that necessitate people coming to a food pantry. But so we have 2 particular feeding ministries which are going on right now, and the people who make those possible have done a lot of work to make them still function. And now it's more like takeout. But we have a food pantry called Martha's Pantry on Wednesday and Friday mornings. And then we have a community breakfast, which is a free hot breakfast, and that's Sunday mornings. So those are the 2 things that continue to go on now. Pre-COVID, we hosted English classes for speakers of other languages, and we've done things with the city for these things called sunset socials, which are for elderly low-income population. And then we have also done a bit in support of our immigrant neighbors. That might be the closest thing right now to active social justice engagement. We have friendships and relationships with different people in the immigrant community, and the Immigrant Assistance Center. We've tried to companion with them here and there, and then we've partnered with the South Coast LGBTQ Network right here in New Bedford, which started to my chagrin, it only started after Orlando. That's when for me, I was like, oh, we must be doing things, and that here in our own community. And then I found out about the South Coast Network.
Well, we're grateful for your support and partnership. You guys have been a great partner.
I'm really grateful for what you're doing.
Well, thank you. And so there's also a large children's program at Grace.
Yeah.
People have kids. It's a wonderful program. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Thanks, Andy. We've been blessed with a church that's intergenerational. So we certainly have our elderly populations, but we also have young families and children and youth. So we have a children's program that starts at pre-kindergarten up through 5th grade. And that happens on Sundays after church, or did, and will again. And then we have a youth program that's middle school and high school. And part of that, the church school is definitely there to support the children and the families. And the content is largely, going over the Bible stories and talking about our faith. The youth group is geared with some of that, but it's really more, how do we live lives based on our core values in the world? So what does lived faith look like? It's not as much, well, this is the creed and this is what it means and you have to believe this. It's more like, especially now, I think it's harder to be a young person now than it was when I was growing up. It's constant information all the time, social media and all of that. And so the youth group is really trying to support the youth as they maneuver, as they navigate and grow through adolescence. And to say that, God is with us through this time, and we're here for each other. And then part of it's service as well. So our youth group will help sometimes with our food pantry or community breakfast, do things in the community. We've gone on trips to, they're not just service trips. I mean, they're trips to help others, but they're also trips that help us grow in our own awareness and social action. So they've gone to Appalachia. We've gone to the Rosebud Indian Reservation in South Dakota a few times. We took a trip to Ecuador to learn from people who are right in the trenches, social activists and community leaders and church leaders, to hear a little bit about the situation there and how our lives are interlinked, even though we don't always recognize it. We've also done anti-racism work. We've brought in people from the YWCA to do work around racial justice and white privilege, and that's important.
That's great. So people, just to go over, people who want to find out more about Grace can call the office. And
they can call me.
Okay.
I can give you my number.
Sure, let's do it.
Okay. 508-985-3823. 508-985-3823. And I give you my number partly because that's just what I do, but also because the church office would be a great number pre or post COVID.
Okay.
But right now, like, I come in, I check the mail, I check the messages, and we're still functioning, but at a more minimal level.
All right. So do you want to say any message for those at Pride? This will be...
Yeah.
Go. All right.
I'll say first, I'm going to miss you. I love the Pride Day that's been going on in Buttonwood. It's always a lot of fun, and I will miss being with y'all for that. But our hearts are with you, and really honored to be with you right now. God bless you and keep up the work, because it's obvious that the fight is not over. But I do think that we are on the right side of history. Well, I know that. And it takes all of us.
That's
Keep
great.
it up.
Thanks. Well, I'm going to end it there. Thanks.